And back to one of the day's top stories, a U.S. federal court has struck down some U.S. tariffs, including those on Canadian goods. This is a significant development in President Donald Trump's trade war. And the CBC's Aaron Collins is following the story from Washington. So, Aaron, what more can you tell us about this court ruling?
Well, it's a big deal, Andrew. It's the first big pushback from courts on, I guess, the core underlying justification for these broad tariffs that have really, hit the entire world. So, the Trump administration used this really obscure legislation called the International Emergencies Economic Powers Act. It's a mouthful, to enact these tariffs. And, this is an act that historically has been used for things like sanctions against, bad actors, countries that have gone rogue, this kind of thing on the world stage. But in this case, it was used to apply sanctions on, everyone, allies, adversaries, everyone. Now, in the case of Canada and Mexico, the justification was the importation of fentanyl. For the rest of the world, for those broad reciprocal tariffs we saw with the big board with all the numbers next to them, the justification there was trade imbalances between the U.S. and those countries. So this use of the Emergency Economic Powers Act, that was challenged by a bunch of states and a couple of private organizations, private companies as well. And late yesterday, the U.S. Court of International Trade, you mentioned that court, ruled that the use of this act in this way was illegal and gave the Trump administration 10 days to wind down these tariffs. So it's a big win for the states and the companies that made this challenge and for American consumers, according to one of the lawyers behind the challenge.
This is a huge problem for not only our 5 business clients who were tremendously impacted by these tariffs negatively, but also for businesses across the country, and I think for consumers, American consumers who will feel the effects of these tariffs had they gone on longer.
So, Andrew, at its core, these tariffs are a tax on imports, which eventually trickles down to the consumers. That's what you're hearing there. And this ruling is basically saying that the president can't do this kind of thing unilaterally, and that these kind of tariffs, they've got to go through Congress. And
Aaron, what reaction are we getting from the Trump administration?
Well, the predictable one, right? They're not happy. The administration has already signaled that they plan to fight. This is not in the DNA of this administration to take something like this sitting down. They're going to take this to court, looking for an emergency injunction in the short term and saying that they're going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court if they have to in order to challenge this. And of course, all of this comes, right? The backdrop of this is all coming as the administration is locked in trade negotiations with pretty much every country on the planet. The focus right now on talks with the EU and China. So taking away these tariffs, it's taking away a big stick for U.S. negotiators, and the White House clearly not happy with this ruling and defending its justification for their tariff strategy.
In 2024, our trade deficit in goods exceeded $1 trillion. Everybody agrees this is unacceptable. President Trump is delivering on his promise to fix this problem, and he has taken a long overdue and much needed bold stance for American workers after decades of our manufacturing base being hollowed out. The president's rationale for imposing these powerful tariffs was legally sound and grounded in common sense.
So, Andrew, important to know, wherever these court battles end up, in this specific case, Canada wasn't extremely impacted by this decision. I mean, the vast majority of our exports to the U.S., about 90% are the estimates I've heard, are still covered under CUSMA. So they are still tariff-free. There are exceptions, of course. You mentioned them there, the steel, the aluminum, the cars. Those are being tariffed through a different mechanism. That's that 232 mechanism, and there's a different justification for that. So it doesn't impact that. There will still be some Canadian businesses impacted, but for the most part, this is more of a signal to the rest of the world. And I suppose, it could impact those negotiations, as I said, going on with all those other countries, with China, with the European Union, with pretty much everyone. And I guess from a Canadian perspective, and you listen to all of those politicians weighing in Marina's pack, I suppose anything that kind of puts a spoke or a stick in the spokes of the wheels of the Trump trade agenda, it can't hurt when you're also trying to negotiate a deal with these folks.
Aaron, thank you. The CBC's Aaron Collins live in Washington.